Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Jobe. I'm Vice President Commercial Partnerships for Flight Centre for the Americas, and I'm very happy to be based here in Vancouver. I have been here, I'm another non-local, as you can probably tell. Originally from the UK. I've been in Canada since '99 and in Vancouver since about 2002. My reason for being in Vancouver was pretty much a sunny day like this. Came out to visit, and it was in March, and the sun was shining, and I was walking around town. I thought, that looks like a nice place to live, so that's how I ended up here. Had I been here on a day like last Saturday, I probably would have been in Toronto by now. But I've been very, very happy to be here. My wife is Canadian, although not from here. My kids were born here, so we're very, very, very settled in Vancouver. So that's my story as to how I arrived here. I want to tell you a little bit about how and why Flight Centre is in Vancouver. I'll start a little bit with our global footprint. This is where we are around the world. We're an Australian-based company based in Brisbane. Our turnover globally last year was $19 billion Australian. Of that, $1.2 billion Australian dollars was here in Canada. So we're a fairly large part of the overall organisation, but just about half of our revenue still sits in Australia. So that is by far still the mothership. It's where a lot of the major decisions are taken, although increasingly those decisions are getting devolved to other parts of the world. The countries you can see there where we have those blue boxes, those are countries where we have equity ownership. So we have large businesses in obviously Australia, New Zealand, China, including Hong Kong, Southeast Asia based out of Singapore, India, Europe based out of the UK. We've recently acquired a business in the Netherlands as well as Ireland, the UAE and Dubai. South Africa, and USA and Mexico. So Mexico is our newest equity partner country. That's a business that we acquired around about 6 months or so ago, and that reports into the US business. When we first came to Canada in 1995, Vancouver was the first place where we opened up. Looked something like this. This isn't actually the first shop, but it looked a lot like this. I think this is actually Kensington in Calgary, but our first shop was on Robson Street here in Vancouver, and that was it. We had one shop there. Everything was done in that one shop. We had a small back office, which was basically the washroom, I think. And the first contract that we signed was with Air New Zealand. It was signed on the top of a milk crate in the back of that office. So we've grown from very humble origins back 21 years ago to where we are today. The reason why we chose Vancouver as our first point of landing in North America was basically down to geography. Being based in Australia for reasons for proximity basically to Australia and the time zone difference makes much more sense here than it does on the East Coast. Plus the guys who came over here from Australia to open up the business like skiing. So they, like I, thought this looks like a nice place to live, let's start here. Which is as good a reason as any, really, to start a business, I think. We've moved on quite a bit since those times. We have now multiple brands in Canada. The brand that you're most familiar with is probably the Flight Centre brand. And I noticed there's actually one of those shops right outside the window there, so thanks, Jason, for choosing this location. I'm sure you had that in mind. So that is our bread and butter. That is our main leisure brand, and I'm sure as you walk around Vancouver, you see Flight Centre locations on quite a few street corners. That was obviously our first brand as well, and that was our only brand for about 6 or 7 years when we started moving into corporate travel. So the brands you can see on the first line there are all part of our corporate family. So Corporate Traveller is our SME business. This is our largest corporate business. We have about 43, I think, businesses across Canada in the Corporate Traveller brand, looking after small businesses in their local markets. We have CI Events, which is our event management, our MICE brand, which is our newest brand in Canada, opened about 6 months ago, currently in Toronto. We have Stage and Screen Travel Solutions, which is our niche entertainment and sporting groups corporate brand, and FCM Travel Solutions. So FCM is our large market brand, typically much larger spend, typically companies that have presence in multiple countries around the world. And in addition to those countries we saw on the previous slide, we've also got FCM licensees in 90-odd countries around the world as well. On the leisure side, Flight Centre, like I said, is our bread and butter leisure brand, and GoGo Vacations is our wholesale brand. So we've expanded quite a bit from that original single shop that we had on Robson Street. And this is our current Canadian footprint. So this is where we have locations now. And every province, apart from a couple, we don't have any presence in New Brunswick or PEI, but we do pretty much everywhere else now as well. We have 234 businesses in 190 locations across Canada, all headquartered out of Vancouver. Of those 234 businesses, 81 of those are in BC, with a heavy concentration, obviously, around Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, as well as locations on Vancouver Island and in the interior. So Vancouver does remain our Canadian head office. Many of the support functions are still run out of Vancouver. Functions such as marketing, most of our marketing presence is done here, as well as our own in-house artworks division. IT is all out of here. Products, the division which I'm part of, which looks after our commercial partnerships with our suppliers and such like. Almost all of our finance is run out of here. Our CFO is based out of Vancouver. Our customer relations, operations support for retail and corporate, and training is also found here as well. One thing that has changed over the last few years is that with our global expansion, especially in the Americas, the Canadian business now reports into the US, so into our head office in New Jersey. So even though we're still globally headquartered in Brisbane, the Americas is headquartered out of New Jersey, and the Canadian business reports into that now. So we have seen some movement of some functions over towards Eastern Canada and into New York, but Vancouver does remain the registered head office here and will continue to do so. Strategically, for a travel company, it's a very good location to be because of the market that we operate in. Our largest growing market is the Pacific, Asia and the South Pacific specifically. Vancouver Airport has, I think, more Asian airlines flying into it than any other airport in North America. It seems every week there's a new one here. I noticed Alex from Xiamen here earlier, and there's another example of a new airline that's moved into this particular market. Just last week, Air Canada announced 2 new routes to Asia, Taipei and Nagoya. So it's a hugely growing market. It's a very, very important market for us, both on the leisure and the corporate side. And most of those airlines are based here on the West Coast. So we actually run all of our relationships with all of those Asia-Pacific carriers that are based on the West Coast. We run those out of Vancouver for the Americas, so for the Canadian business and the US business as well. Our top markets globally include many major markets in Asia and the Pacific. Of our top 5 international markets, we find 3 of them in that area. Sydney, Manila and Bangkok are 3 of our busiest destinations in terms of the number of people that we send to international destinations. Moving in a little bit closer, most of our businesses we find in 2 locations, in the Greater Vancouver area and the Greater Toronto area. So that is where our bread and butter is, and that's where our growth will continue to be focused in these 2 main locations. Specifically in Vancouver, like I said, we have a lot of support functions here. We continue to do that, and it's very easy to persuade people to come and live and work in Vancouver because of the reasons that Marsha talked about, the quality of life here, the ease of which it is to really make a living here and to make this home as I have done, and many of the others who have not grown up in Vancouver. Being a multinational organisation, we do tend to promote internally, so we're not necessarily recruiting from outside. There are some exceptions in roles like finance and IT, but generally we recruit internally. But that internal recruitment can mean not just from our business in Canada, but from around the world. There are a lot of Australians in our business here. I get mistaken for Australian about 3 times a week, including one so far today. But it's very easy to persuade someone from Brisbane to come and live here for a couple of years, and that often turns into 4, 6, 8, 10 years or beyond. Americans as well have moved up to this part of the world and made this home. As to our future strategy, our shops have come a long way. Not the one over there, because that's a little bit tatty, but that will change very quickly, and it'll look something like this. So we are investing, and we'll continue to invest in our footprint across the country, both in terms of our retail locations and our head office locations. So you'll see there are a couple of examples in Vancouver where we've taken some older shops and completely refurbished them and spent quite a bit of money on refitting them into a completely new experience. The shop on Howe and Dunsmuir, just a block or so from here, is the most local example of that. That's the first business in Canada that we refitted along these lines. Retail strategy when it comes to leisure locations is basically to look at our locations, decide whether that's somewhere we want to be in the next 5 years or so. If it is, then we'll expand it and we'll refit it. If it isn't, we'll close it and we'll consolidate that business into another store. So that store on Howe and Dunsmuir actually has three teams within it. So there were previously 3 different shops which have been consolidated into that one location. And that allows us to spend more on those locations and make them more of a destination. The example you see here is Queen West in Toronto, which is another what we call mega store. We've got multiple teams in one location. We have one in Kitts, which opened a few weeks ago, which is similar to that as well. The interior is very different. We're opening it up a lot more. It's more of a consultative environment. Instead of the days where you walk in, you see a barrier of people with all the products behind them. Not the most welcoming experiences. And people today are used to retail environments when they can go in and they can look and they can touch and they can experience the products. It's difficult to experience travel products without getting on a plane, but this is as close as we can get to it. The Apple stores, the great example of this, I think, where people go in and they want to actually touch the merchandise and explore. So this theme of exploration is what we're building into our newer shops, where we have the products around the outside, and we have lots of interactive touch screens, maps on the wall, all that sort of thing, with the consultative areas in the middle, which is much more of a pleasant kind of sit-down environment rather than sitting on a bench and looking across at someone. We continue to see that in our mall locations as well. Metrotown is an example of a mall location that we've recently refitted along the same lines. And like I said, over the next 5 or 6 years, we'll continue to see this in all of our locations across Canada. The final stage of this will be the development of what we call the travel centre, which is a multi-brand location. We've just signed off in our first travel centre location in Toronto. That's this one here in King West, so a prime location. King and Spadina, if you know Toronto at all. It's a Category A location, a Category A building. Allows us to have, it's about 10,500 square feet, so very, very large. Allows us to have a showpiece sales floor where the Flight Centre brand will sit, but we'll also in the back and upstairs have multiple other brands as well, like CI Events, Stage and Screen. We'll also move into those locations. So in terms of how that impacts our head office strategy across Canada, we'll see these type of locations in places like Vancouver and Calgary and other major centres as well. The building that we're in right now, 1133 Melville Street, it serves its purpose, but it's getting a little bit dated. The first 5 floors are actually a car park, so it doesn't look like much. We're on the 6th, so it gets a bit chilly in the winter. And if you look outside of it, there's actually a big development sign. So it's one of those places that's going to be knocked down in a couple of years, and we'll see more condos go up. So, as is the way of life in Vancouver. So that means at some point over the next couple of years or so, we'll be moving into a new head office location somewhere in the downtown area. About half of our head office space right now is actually taken up by salespeople. We have a lot of corporate traveller shops in there. We have an FCM shop. We have a Stage and Screen shop in there. The idea is to move them into places like this, into more of a sales theatre. They don't need to be in a head office location, and we'll keep those head office functions in a much smaller space in wherever we end up. So if anyone's got a lead on a good head office location that we can make into something quite funky, I'm quite happy to talk to you about that. What we see these days is in head office locations, certainly in Flight Centre, is much more fun environments. It needs to be a place where it's very welcoming and exciting to go to work. Our new office in Montvale, New Jersey, which opened a couple of weeks ago, is very much like that. There's a whole open area we call the Lido deck. It's very much like the Lido deck of a cruise ship. There's actually shuffleboard you can play there and that sort of thing. So a lot of companies are moving that way. Everyone takes Google as an example of that, where they have the funky work spaces around there. And our new head office in Brisbane, which opens next month, actually has a couple of slides from one floor to another. So I'm hoping that that's the way we go in Vancouver. That'll be a lot of fun. But overall, our strategy is to, like I said, take those retail spaces, really uplift them, make them bigger than they currently are, consolidate them, and our head office locations may be smaller because we don't have the same amount of sales floor in there, but we're very much committed to keeping those locations where they are. So we've been in Vancouver for 21 years. We'll be here for a lot longer. We're very happy to be there. It's a great place to be. It's a great place to work. Most of the people who work in that office either walk to work or have a very short commute. which is a really something that's quite unique to Vancouver compared to many world cities, especially when you talk to those people who live in New Jersey. That's not something that they can do. So that's the Flight Centre business model. That's how we came to be in Vancouver. Like I said, we're happy to be here, and we hope to be here for many years to come.